You'll never amount to anything in business. My father's words cut through the laughter and clinking glasses like a blade. Around us, 300 relatives filled the grand dining hall of Golden Fork's flagship restaurant. The chandeliers sparkled above our heads, crystal catching the light while the family toasted another year of success. But at table 12, all eyes had turned on me, the so-called disappointment. Emily, the librarian. Emily, the follower. Emily, the one who, according to Dad, lacked the ambition to do more than stamp books and file late fees. He said it loud enough for everyone to hear. His cheeks flushed from wine, his voice booming with certainty. Laughter rippled around the table. Cousins smirked. Aunts nodded sympathetically. Someone muttered, "Well, at least libraries are important." My chest tightened, and for a moment the air felt too heavy to breathe. I wanted to scream. Instead, I smiled. I let them think they'd won. But what none of them knew, what no one in that glittering room could even imagine, was that every glass raised, every bite of Golden Fork's signature chocolate soufflé, every expansion into Ohio or Tennessee, had been paid for with my money. For 7 years, I had silently bankrolled their empire. While they mocked me, I owned them. That night, while they laughed at my expense, I was already planning the move that would shatter their illusion of power forever. A single decision, one call, and the $200 million holding their dynasty together would vanish like smoke. And when it happened, the empire they worshipped would crumble, starting with the smug smile on my father's face. Before we dive deeper, I want you to stop for a second. What would you have done if your own family told you you would never be enough? Comment below, hit that like button if you're ready to see how this story unfolds, and don't forget to subscribe. Because trust me, you don't want to miss what happens next. Because this wasn't just revenge, this was justice. And it started the moment I pushed back my chair, smiled sweetly, and walked away from that table. But what pushed me to finally pull the trigger after years of silence? They thought I was invisible. At every family reunion, I was the quiet one in the corner, the girl in a simple dress, smiling politely while my cousins boasted about restaurant openings and six-figure salaries. I let them think I was small, unimportant, forgettable. But invisibility can be power if you know how to use it. 7 years earlier, after Grandma passed, I received something no one else in the family knew about: a trust. $50 million, money my father assumed never existed. He believed Grandma had left me a little something for stability. What he didn't know was that her faith in me ran deeper than his disdain. I didn't waste that inheritance. I invested it. Not recklessly, not loudly, silently. Through a web of holding companies, I built a fortress of anonymity. The biggest of them all was Temps River Holdings, a name so boring, so forgettable, that no one ever asked who stood behind it. And through Temps River, I began buying. Golden Fork was expanding fast, almost too fast, relying on outside investors to fund every new location. They thought they were playing with Wall Street money. They had no idea the quiet librarian they mocked was the majority shareholder signing off on their dreams. Every new menu rollout, approved by me. Every sparkling new restaurant in Ohio, paid for by me. Every salary of every cousin who sat at that reunion table bragging about their success, funded by me. And yet, I never said a word, because silence was my weapon. The longer they underestimated me, the sharper my eventual strike would be. I studied them carefully. Every overconfident toast, every reckless expansion plan, every smug dismissal of my worth. They were building an empire on my dime, and every time my father said, "Emily will never understand business," I smiled, because I was already outplaying them in a game they didn't even know I was part of. But power like this, it demands patience. For years, I waited in the shadows, letting them grow more arrogant, more careless, more dependent on me. Until the night of that reunion, when my father's words landed like the final straw. "You'll never amount to anything." That's when I knew the time had come. And what happens when the invisible investor decides to reveal her hand? The smell of roasted salmon and chocolate soufflé lingered in the air, but I barely tasted it. Around me, the clinking of silverware and bursts of laughter echoed like a cruel reminder. This was their empire, and I was just a spectator in it. At least, that's what they thought. My father leaned back in his chair, wine glass in hand, and delivered his favorite performance, explaining why his daughter was destined to fail. "Emily's a follower, not a leader," he declared proudly, as if dismissing me in front of 300 relatives was some kind of wisdom. "She stamps books for a living. She'll never amount to anything in business." The table chuckled, heads nodding in agreement. My cousin Sarah, the self-proclaimed finance genius, smirked. My Uncle Mike raised his glass in yet another toast to the real entrepreneurs of the family. Even my mother smiled weakly, too used to this ritual humiliation to intervene. I felt the words burn, not because they were new. They weren't. I'd heard this script for a decade, but this time, surrounded by chandeliers and smug grins, something inside me snapped. My pulse quickened. My palms itched against the linen tablecloth. I wanted to scream, to slam my hands down, to tell them that without me, none of this, not a single location, would exist. But I didn't. Instead, I smiled faintly, lowered my fork, and said, "You're right, Dad. I should probably leave the success to my cousins." The satisfaction on their faces was almost unbearable. They believed they'd put me back in my place. What they didn't know was that in that moment, I made my decision. No more silence, no more patience. It was time to pull the plug. I excused myself, murmuring something about the restroom, and slipped away from the table. My heels clicked softly against the polished floor as I moved through the dining room. The Golden Fork staff bustled around me, clearing plates and refilling glasses. Employees who didn't even know that I signed their paychecks. In the quiet of the bathroom, I locked the door and pulled out my phone. My hands trembled, not with fear, but with adrenaline. I scrolled to Patricia's number, my fund manager at Thames River Holdings, and pressed call. "Emily," she answered. "Is everything all right?" "No," I whispered, staring at my reflection in the mirror. "It's time. Pull everything. I want a full liquidation of Golden Fork within 30 days. There was a pause, a sharp intake of breath. "Emily, that's your largest position. $200 million. Without you, Golden Fork will collapse." "I know," I said, my voice steady. "That's the point." I hung up and stared into the mirror, my heart pounding. For the first time in years, I didn't see the quiet librarian everyone dismissed. I saw power, control, justice. And soon my family would see it too. But how does one woman's decision ripple through an empire built on arrogance? The storm was coming. The next morning, the world looked ordinary. Chicago's skyline glittered in the sun, children pressed their noses to the library windows where I worked, and my coffee steamed in its paper cup. Ordinary, except for one thing. Golden Fork's heartbeat had already started to falter. My phone buzzed relentlessly, but I let it vibrate against the desk. Uncle Mike, then Derek, then Aunt Rebecca. One after the other, their names filled the screen like dominoes falling. By noon, I had 11 missed calls and 14 text messages. I finally listened to the first voicemail. "Emily, it's Mike. Something strange has happened. Our primary investor just pulled out. All of it. 200 million gone. We don't understand what's happening, but we need to meet tonight. Emergency. Call me back." I set the phone down slowly, almost smiling. The cracks had formed faster than I expected. By mid-afternoon, Derek's panicked text popped up. "Derek, have you heard? Golden Fork is collapsing. Someone called Thames River Holdings pulled everything. Who are they? Why would they do this?" Aunt Rebecca's voicemail followed, her voice trembling. "Emily, sweetheart, I know you're not really involved in the business side of things, but, oh God, we're in crisis. If you hear anything about this investor, please call me." I placed my phone face down and turned to the children's reading program. 15 preschoolers waited for me, giggling, squirming, asking about the green eggs in the storybook I held. I smiled at them, the weight of their innocence cutting through the storm brewing outside. "Let's read," I said, and began turning pages. But while my voice carried Dr. Seuss's silly rhymes, my thoughts were already on the chaos spreading through Golden Fork's headquarters. I could see it vividly. Uncle Mike pacing with his tie loosened, Derek frantically comparing spreadsheets, Rebecca clutching her phone with trembling hands. And my father, oh my father, red-faced and confused, demanding answers from a board that had none. By evening, a final text arrived. This one from Dad. Dad. Emergency family meeting tonight. Mike's house. Golden Fork in crisis. Everyone must attend. I typed back slowly, savoring each word. I can't. Library inventory. You said yourself I'm not part of the business. For the first time in my life, I told him no. The silence that followed was almost sweeter than revenge. Because while my family rushed to patch the cracks, none of them realized the entire foundation was gone. And soon, those cracks would turn into a collapse. But what happens when the empire begins to crumble in public? When the press and the community see the dynasty for what it really is? By Wednesday morning, Golden Fork's downfall was no longer a family secret. It was public humiliation. The Chicago Tribune ran the headline in bold black letters. Golden Fork Empire teeters after $200 million investor pullout. I read it over my morning coffee, the paper trembling slightly in my hands, not from fear, but from the adrenaline of watching years of quiet planning finally bear fruit. The article detailed the sudden withdrawal by Temps River Holdings, noting that the chain's aggressive expansion into new markets had left them dangerously overextended. Without continued funding, Golden Fork was weeks away from insolvency. The story spread like wildfire. Local news stations ran segments outside shuttered Golden Fork locations, interviewing confused employees who hadn't been paid in 2 weeks. Customers voiced their shock. "We came here every Sunday after church," one woman said on camera. "How does a place this big just collapse overnight?" Inside the family, panic turned to desperation. My phone buzzed constantly. Voicemails, texts, emails. Uncle Mike's voice cracked with exhaustion. "Emily, the board is in chaos. Investors are circling like vultures. If we don't find capital in the next 30 days, it's over." Derek's messages were more frantic. "Please, do you know anyone who could reinvest? Hedge funds, venture groups, anyone? We're dead without it." Even Aunt Rebecca, always so composed, broke down on her call. 400 employees, Emily. I had to let them go yesterday. Do you know what that feels like? Families, mortgages, kids in school, and all because some faceless investor pulled the plug. Why would anyone do this? I stared at my phone in silence. I knew exactly why. Because no empire should survive on arrogance alone. By Friday, Golden Fork had become a punchline. Talk shows mocked the family dynasty, too blind to notice its lifeline was cut. Blogs speculated about who Temps River Holdings really was. A rival chain? A billionaire with a grudge? Or just a cold-blooded investor pulling out at peak value? None guessed the quiet librarian sipping her latte on the L train. Meanwhile, my father avoided me. No calls, no texts. I imagined him pacing in Uncle Mike's study, fuming, unable to process how quickly his certainty had unraveled. But soon he would call. He would have to. Because when a kingdom collapses, even the proudest king eventually seeks answers from the one person left standing. And when that call finally came, it was more than desperation. It was the beginning of a confession he never thought he'd make. It was Sunday evening when my phone finally lit up with his name. Dad. For 3 days, I'd watched the Golden Fork empire unravel in real time. Stores closing, employees left stranded, the family's reputation shredded in the press. But this was the moment I'd been waiting for, the call I knew would eventually come. I let it ring twice before answering. "Emily?" His voice was sharp at first, like he'd been rehearsing anger. But then it cracked, thin and desperate. "We need to talk. Now." I leaned back in my chair, heart steady, voice calm. "What's going on?" "You know damn well what's going on," he snapped, before his tone shifted again, softer, pleading. "Golden Fork is collapsing. Everything we built, it's slipping through our fingers, and His voice faltered. "I don't know how to stop it." Silence stretched between us. I could almost hear the weight of his pride crumbling. Finally, he spoke again, lower this time. "They say Temps River Holdings pulled out. That's who funded us. That's who carried us this whole time. Without them, we're finished. Emily." His breath caught. "Do you know who they are? Do you know anything about them?" My pulse quickened, but I kept my tone light. "Dad, I'm a librarian. What would I know about $200 million investors?" He sighed heavily. the sound of a man defeated. He stopped, collecting himself. At the reunion, I said things, hurtful things, about you, about your choices. I didn't mean them the way they came out. The memory of his smug voice rang in my ears. You'll never amount to anything. But now that same man sounded broken. I've spent years underestimating you, he admitted. Maybe longer than years, maybe your whole life. And sitting here now, watching everything fall apart, I keep wondering. His words trailed off, but I could feel them hanging between us. Wondering if I've been wrong about you all along. I didn't answer right away. I wanted him to sit in that silence, to taste the bitterness of what it felt like to be dismissed, ignored, undervalued. When I finally spoke, my voice was steady, almost kind. Dad, I told you once, I'm fine where I am, maybe you should start believing me. He didn't argue. For the first time in my life, my father had no lecture, no condescension, no certainty. Just quiet breathing on the other end of the line. And then softly, words I never expected to hear. Emily, maybe I was wrong about you. My chest tightened, not with pain, but with power. Because this wasn't just a father's apology. This was the first crack in the wall he had built between us all my life. But what he didn't know, what he couldn't even imagine, was that the truth would hit him harder than any market collapse. The call had ended, but his words haunted me. Maybe I was wrong about you. For years, I had craved that sentence, through every cutting remark, every laugh at my expense, every smug toast celebrating the brilliance of everyone except me. But now, hearing it for the first time, I realized something powerful. His apology was too small for the weight of what he had done. And the truth? The truth was far larger than he could handle. 2 days later, I received a summons to an emergency family meeting at Uncle Mike's house. The Golden Fork executive team, my father, my uncles, my cousins, sat around a table stacked with financial reports, investor notices, and failed projections. Their faces were pale, drawn, desperate. Uncle Mike cleared his throat. We need to talk about Temps River Holdings. Whoever they are, they held 78% of Golden Fork. They were the blood in our veins. And now, they're gone. Gone. That single word echoed like a funeral bell. My cousin Derek slammed his hand on the table. It doesn't make sense. Why pull out now? Q3 numbers looked strong on paper. I couldn't help it. I laughed, quietly at first, then louder when the entire table turned to stare at me. What's so funny? Aunt Rebecca snapped, her HR polish cracking under pressure. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the polished oak table. What is funny is that you all keep talking about Temps River Holdings like it as some faceless corporation. Like you never stopped to wonder who was actually signing your paychecks all these years. The room went silent. Even my father's breathing grew shallow. Uncle Mike narrowed his eyes. Emily, what are you saying? I let the pause hang, savoring the tension, the fear, the dawning realization flickering in their eyes. I'm saying, I began slowly, my voice steady as glass, that the biggest mistake this family ever made was assuming the quiet librarian in the corner was too simple to understand business. Gasps rippled around the table. My father's hand tightened around his coffee mug until his knuckles went white. Temps River Holdings, I continued, was me. My trust fund, my money, my decisions. Every expansion you toasted, every renovation you bragged about, every dollar you wasted on bad management, it was all approved because I allowed it. And when I pulled out, I leaned back, watching their faces crumble. That was me too. My father's mouth opened, but no words came. The man who had spent decades telling me I'd never amount to anything looked like he had been struck across the face. I stood, collecting my bag. So, when you said I'd never be successful, when you told me I should leave it to my cousins, my eyes locked with his. Turns out, I was the only reason you ever had success at all. No one moved. No one spoke. The silence was heavier than any applause I'd ever heard in that family. As I walked out, my heart pounded, not from fear, but from freedom. For the first time, they were the ones left speechless, and I was the one holding all the power. But the fallout? Oh, that was just beginning. The air in Uncle Mike's dining room was thick, like smoke after a fire. Nobody dared to look directly at me as I left, but I could still feel their stares drilling into my back. By the time I reached my car, my phone buzzed with a flurry of messages. From Derek. Emily, wait. We need to talk, please. From Aunt Rebecca. You don't understand what this means for hundreds of employees. Can we meet? From Dad. Nothing. Just silence. That silence was louder than all the frantic messages combined. The next morning, Golden Fork's headquarters was chaos. Employees whispered in hallways. Board members flooded Patricia's office with demands for explanations. My withdrawal had set fire to their carefully stacked house of cards, and now the entire empire teetered on collapse. By Wednesday, the cracks widened. Vendors refused shipments until payments cleared. Construction on the new Nashville locations froze overnight. Reporters camped outside Golden Fork restaurants, microphones ready, chasing the story of the mystery investor who had walked away with $200 million and the Johnson family. They were panicking. Uncle Mike tried to rally everyone into a strategy session, but without capital, there was no strategy. Derek begged his old marketing contacts for miracle investors, only to be laughed out of the room. Aunt Rebecca even dipped into her personal retirement fund, desperate to cover payroll for 2 weeks. I didn't attend their meetings. I didn't return their calls. But I heard everything, through Patricia, through the headlines, through the desperate cousins who tried to corner me outside the library, suddenly all too eager to collaborate. The worst was my father. For years, he had been the loudest voice proclaiming my uselessness. Now he was the quietest. He didn't rage, didn't demand. He simply looked broken. When we finally crossed paths in the grocery store, he avoided my eyes, his cart half empty, his shirt wrinkled in a way I'd never seen before. Emily, he muttered, his voice barely above a whisper. Did you really? He trailed off, unable to finish. I said nothing. Silence was my answer, and it was enough. Within 3 weeks, Golden Fork filed for bankruptcy protection. Locations closed one by one. Cousins lost their cushy management jobs. The empire they had toasted, bragged about, and lorded over me for years had crumbled into ashes. And me? I shelved books. I brewed coffee in my tiny kitchen. I lived my life as if nothing had changed. Because for me, nothing had. The empire was theirs to flaunt, but it had always been mine to end. But this wasn't just about destruction. It was about balance, justice, and teaching them the lesson they never wanted to learn. The Golden Fork dynasty wasn't just collapsing, it was imploding. Headlines screamed their humiliation. Midwest's top restaurant chain files for bankruptcy. Golden Fork expansion grinds to a halt as investors flee. But the most brutal headline came from the Chicago Tribune. Was Golden Fork's growth built on smoke and mirrors? My family read every word in shame. By then, I could no longer walk into the grocery store without bumping into someone who knew the story. Not the whole truth, of course. Nobody outside the boardroom knew who Temps River Holdings really was. But whispers carried, neighbors speculated, former employees searched for answers. And that's when my phone rang, Dad again. Only this time, there was no anger in his voice, no dismissal. Just desperation. Emily, he said quietly, we need your help. I let the silence stretch. He'd never said those words to me in my life. He went on, the family, your uncles, cousins, everyone, we're out of options. No banks will touch us, no investors want the risk. But you, his voice broke. You seem to understand these things, more than we gave you credit for. There it was, the apology buried inside the plea. The acknowledgement I had waited years to hear. I leaned back in my chair, the weight of his words pressing on me. Part of me wanted to savor this moment forever. Another part of me, the part that remembered every sneer, every insult, every Thanksgiving toast that painted me as the failure, wanted to slam the door in his face. But justice isn't always about revenge. Sometimes it's about clarity. So I asked the question that burned on my tongue. Dad, tell me, why should I save a family that never once believed I was worth listening to? There was a pause, a long exhale. Then, for the first time in his life, my father said the words I thought I'd never hear. Because I was wrong. About you. About everything. And I'll spend the rest of my life proving it if you give me the chance. The power shifted in that instant. I didn't say yes. I didn't say no. Instead, I told him, I'll think about it. But whether or not Golden Fork survives, that's not up to you anymore. That's up to me. And as I ended the call, I felt it. Years of humiliation, belittlement, and dismissal finally transforming into something sharp, clean, and undeniable: control. But the real climax wasn't in what I said. It was in what came next. When my family realized redemption, if it came at all, would arrive only on my terms. Weeks passed. Golden Fork's empire crumbled one restaurant at a time. Locations once buzzing with diners sat dark and empty, their signs stripped down, chairs stacked against the walls. The proud dynasty my family worshipped had become a cautionary tale whispered about in business schools. And through it all, my phone never stopped ringing. Dad called almost daily, sometimes pleading, sometimes reflective. My uncles left desperate voicemails about second chances. My cousins, once so smug about their managerial titles, now begged for introductions to my supposed contacts. They still hadn't figured it out. They didn't realize I was the contact they needed. The power reversal was intoxicating. For once, I wasn't the overlooked librarian in the corner. I was the quiet storm that had changed everything. But the truth is, I didn't destroy Golden Fork out of spite. I pulled the plug because they had built their empire on arrogance, reckless spending, and blind entitlement. Saving them would have been like pouring water into a sinking ship. Still, I knew there was a lesson to be taught. Not just for them, but for me. So when Dad called one last time, his voice stripped of pride, I let him talk. Emily, I don't care about the restaurants anymore. I don't care about the money. What I care about is this. I underestimated you. I humiliated you. I told you you'd never amount to anything. And I was wrong. The truth is, you've always been smarter than all of us. And if you never forgive me, I'll understand. But I needed to say it. My chest tightened. For the first time, I heard sincerity in his words. No performance, no audience. Just a father admitting his failure. I took a slow breath before answering. Dad, I don't need you to worship me. I don't need you to pretend I'm a hero. All I ever wanted was respect. And maybe now, finally, we're getting there. We never spoke of Golden Fork again. But something shifted. At dinners, he asked about my opinions. He listened. He laughed with me, not at me. It wasn't perfect, but it was enough. Golden Fork became a ghost of the past. I invested openly in smaller, meaningful businesses, bookstores, cafes, family-owned shops on the verge of collapse, places where people valued partnership instead of exploitation, places where respect was the true currency. And sometimes when Dad visited one of those cafes and saw my name on the plaque, he'd smile faintly and shake his head. I should have known, he'd say. Because deep down, he did know. He just never believed it, until it was too late. And that was the sweetest justice of all. And now, I want to hear from you. What's the most satisfying moment of justice you've ever witnessed? Drop it in the comments below, and don't forget to hit like and subscribe for more stories like this one.